Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, CISSP Test-Taking Tactics, Successfully Navigating Adaptive Exams. My name is Carol Auth of SANS. Today's featured speaker is Seth Misenar, SANS Faculty Fellow. He will be moderating today's webcast. If in the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to turn the webcast over to Seth.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. Hi, y'all. Seth Misenar. This is going to be a bit different than my normal talks related to the CISSP or just normal presentations in general. This is going to be a companion webcast to my partner in crime, Eric Conrad's previous webcast. Some of y'all might have already attended it. If not, there will be a link at the very end, and really all links are going to be at the very end of the slide deck. But there will be a link to his webcast, and it was the CISSP cram session. So Conrad's focus was a just whipsaw run through lots of different key aspects of the domains, key aspects of content. We're going to pivot, though, in this webcast and not talk about the content at all, which is kind of weird, but you'll see why. So first, let's kick things off. This is me, or my memoji, right? Whatever. Just for quick purposes, I have been teaching for SANS for like 14 years, 15 years, and I can't remember the first time I taught SANS CISSP class, but certainly it was, at least 12 plus years ago. I'm co-author of, now with Eric Conrad, and you're going to hear me say that a lot, I'm co-author with Eric Conrad of the Management 414, which is SANS CISSP class, and we're also co-authors of the CISSP Study Guide as well as the 11th Hour CISSP. So both of those books have been out for a while, and we're also co-authors of the SANS class. Other things that you probably don't care as much about, but are interesting to me professionally, is also with Eric Conrad. I am the co-curriculum lead, so curriculum lead over SANS Blue Team operations classes. So we get a chunk of classes that we're kind of in charge of building and making sure that they are appropriate for the industry. And of course, this would be kind of silly if I wasn't also a CISSP, so there is that. And then the GSC, I'm GSC number 28, so when they were still cool with the double digits. I'm just kidding. But this is me professionally, and I think for the most part, the stuff that you care about is really on the left-hand side here. Before we dig in order to get this credential, the CISSP, you've got to do a number of things. And the three most important aspects are you have to have greater than equal to 5 years of experience. You've got to, pass the test, which is what we're going to focus on here. And then you also have to be endorsed by a current CISSP holder. And that would get you the CISSP. And one of the reasons I mention this is because the CISSP is such a popular certification in our industry, and it's, in most people's minds, it's a bit overused. It's hard to find any security job posting that doesn't list the CISSP, whether it makes any sense whatsoever or not. So you'll see jobs that say require 1 year of experience, and then they'll say CISSP, which is kind of odd because the CISSP requires 5 years of experience, but whatever. So I mention that because increasingly I'm seeing folks go after the CISSP earlier and earlier and earlier in their careers because, it's important for your career. And so you can now, and this is, it changed a while back, you can now do something a bit different if you don't have the experience requirements, and that is you still pass the test, you still get endorsed, but you don't have the requisite experience, then you become an associate of ISC squared. And it's basically like a little placeholder cert for until you get the requisite experience, and then that's converted to a CISSP. So just a heads up there, if the experience side is questionable, it's not the way it used to be where you were either granted a CISSP or you were not granted a CISSP. Unfortunately, we got to talk about COVID. I know, right? It happens. But this has some very real impact on the test taking. So if you are planning to take the test in the nearest future, and hopefully it's just the nearest future, then you do need to be aware that there are implications of COVID-19 on the CISSP, on the certification. First off, ISC², at least as of this presentation here, June 29th, 2020, as of this time, ISC² has still stated that they're not going to allow for online or remote examinations. So there's no taking the CISSP from home, nothing like that. And they have some explanation and justification as to why that's the case, but you just need to know that they have not changed the way that the test is given or changed the way that the test will be taken. You still have to go to a Pearson VUE testing center. And some notes on that front, Pearson VUE is, well, one, they are all Pearson VUE owned testing centers require you to bring your own mask and have the mask on at all times. This is during the examination. This is going into the test center. You are required to have a mask and you are required to provide it, and it has to cover your nose and your mouth. And that's during the entire time that you're taking the test. So just a heads up there. We'll talk more about test anxiety, which is something that I think is relevant to this, right? Wearing a mask if you didn't expect to, or you didn't think about it, that could be stressful. Another reason to bring this up, and this is more logistics, is that Pearson VUE testing centers are, unsurprisingly, they are requiring social distancing. So this means that the facilities typically have much less space to accommodate exam takers than they normally would. And there also is a bit of a glut of people that needed to take tests through Pearson VUE testing centers and had not been able to or have not been able to due to COVID-19 closures, things like that. So I mention this because I've heard of, I had a student, I guess this was last week. Last week I had a student that was trying to schedule her exam, and she mentioned not being able to find a single slot. She lives in a major metro area, and not being able to find a single spot to take her CISSP within like an hour radius over a period of 2 months, which is kind of wild. So, if this is something that's you're trying to take in the near term, near future, then you probably want to go ahead and check now on the availability. And this is all subject to change, of course. So just a heads up there on COVID-19's implications for the CISSP. Now let's get to the meat of this presentation. The CISSP is now adaptive, and it has been for several years, but what does that actually mean? And that's going to be something that we focus on. What does it mean, but also what are the implications of the exam now being adaptive? Well, just at a basic level, the CISSP or ISC² characterizes the CISSP as being either adaptive or linear. So the old school format was, hey, here's 250 questions, and it was computer-based right before becoming adaptive, but it was still linear. So everyone got 250 questions no matter what, and everyone was allowed 6 hours to take those 250 questions. Now, one heads up, if you were taking the CISSP in a language other than English, you could still be getting the linear exam. Like currently, if you're taking the test in English, your only option is the adaptive exam. If you're taking it in another language, then you have some options, right? So, the overwhelming majority of CISSP takers and credential holders are native English speakers, and they will be taking the test in that fashion. So most of us, the overwhelming majority of us, will be taking the adaptive exam. So there's some changes with the move from linear to adaptive. One big change that I think has some really significant implications is that the amount of time you have to take the test has been cut in half. Now this is a good news, bad news thing. It's good because, wow, 6 hours was a lot. When one of the big things that I used to harp on over and over and over again was just the idea of test taking fatigue. Folks would just get worn out taking this just beastly marathon of an exam. And I don't know about you, but most folks that I know, they perform better the earlier in the exam. So, after you're 4.5, 5 hours in, your brain just ain't working the same way. You're just not quite as sharp as you likely were earlier in the exam. Well, now you have half the amount of time, so you're less likely to kind of be encumbered by that fatigue or just monotony of taking an exam for 6 hours. The number of questions have been chopped pretty substantially, 100 to 150 questions, that's what you're gonna see. But probably the biggest implication is that with the adaptive exam, what that means is that the question that you're going to see is dependent upon your answer to the current question. So you submit, you finalize your question, your answer, you submit this, and that's going to have material impact on the next question that you see. Okay, so, well, one aspect of this is if the next question you see is dependent upon this one, then you can't very well go back. And that's a big, big change. There's no review. There's no going back. As soon as you hit submit, it's gone. Your question has been finalized. That is your answer for all time. And there's no going back. So that has big implications for us. Well, one, we have to be certain of our answer, certain that that is the answer we want to select, but it also has big implications for test taking strategy. No longer do we have to talk about the 1-pass method or 2-pass method or anything like that. We don't have to do that because now there is no reviewing the question. There's no marking it for review and going back later. You hit submit, it's gone. So no going back, but also what I have found is I have not heard from a single person since the exam went adaptive, which has been a few years now. Since the exam went adaptive, I am not aware, I have not had a single student come back to me and indicate that they just tapped out from a time perspective. The time management is not nearly the issue that it used to be on the exam. And you think, well, wait a second, we have much less time, but the big time suck that used to exist was with people deliberating over and over and over on the same sorts of questions. Well, now that's out the window. If you wanted to deliberate on a question, you would just sit there and not ever submit it, and that's kind of painful. So, the ROOT, just as a heads up there, I didn't spell out that acronym. This is one. We'll see the other rules as well, but these are kind of the rules on pass-fail. This is the ran out of time, run out of time rule. And one kind of wild thing is that if you actually run out of time, that doesn't mean that you automatically fail. And I'll kind of get into that in a second. All right, here we go. This is from ISC Squared. This is from their frequently asked questions, which, okay, let's see this. The confidence interval rule. So this is one of the ways that the adaptive testing engine will determine whether you pass or fail. And this is honestly the most common one. This is really what drives that, hey, do I see 100 questions or 150 questions? And just one comment on that. I've had a lot of students that have come back and gotten really, really freaked out when they got to 101 questions, 102, 110, 115 questions, 120 questions. And they started getting really nervous and just assumed that, well, the more questions I have to see, the worse I'm doing. And that's not the case. What you'll see with this confidence interval rule is that really it's the engine, adaptive engine is trying to figure you out. It's trying to understand you as a test taker, and it wants to get to a confidence level where it can say, you know what, you're a hard pass, you're a hard fail. And sometimes it takes longer to do that than others. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you're going to fail if you see over 120 questions by any means. So don't freak yourself out and start worrying and stressing when you submit that 100th question and you see 101, you're like, oh no, I'm not doing well. No, that's not the case. It just means that it doesn't yet know how to sort you, doesn't yet have the confidence to be able to say you're a definite pass, you're a definite fail. So I think of this, like dating. In your dating life, there are some folks, you go on a date and like within 5 seconds, maybe 5 minutes, you immediately know, oh, this ain't gonna work out. No, we can go ahead and tap out and just walk away because this is not gonna work for us. Then there's other folks in dating that it might take you a longer duration. You might realize, hey, it's not gonna work out, but it might take you weeks, months, years to figure out that it's not gonna work out. And I think of that as like the confidence interval rule, because that 100, that is the speed dating, hey, 5 minutes, we're done, this ain't working. That's the 100 questions. The wow, we were together for 15 years and decided, you know what, no, we're just gonna pass. That's the 150 questions. It just takes longer to figure out. That's the only thing it means. So I think of this as like Space Odyssey 2001. Stop the CISSP, Hal. I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that. And then you submit more and more and more questions, right? Because everybody wants to be done at 100 because you think, oh, it's gonna be beautiful. That means I just nailed everything. But you answer a bunch more questions, and then Hal finally says, Dave, additional CISSP questions serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye. And then it's done. So it's once the adaptive engine figures out, hey, it doesn't matter if I give you any more questions or not, I know whether you're gonna pass or fail. And so that's kind of the idea of how it determines the number of questions that you're going to see. One really strange implication. In the olden days, in the linear testing format, you'd see 250 questions. Everyone would see 250 questions. Now, the CISSP is notorious for having an extremely large bank of questions such that people can't brain dump them, which is trying to memorize every question, every answer, right? That sort of thing. So it's got a large question bank, but you would get 250 questions, and everyone would get 250 questions. Now, with the adaptive engine, the testing engine is going to present things dependent upon how you submit, how you perform on each question. And this is really, really important to realize. It's going to try to give you a question that it thinks you have a 50-50 chance of getting right. Like, that's its goal. Now, early on in the exam, it doesn't really know you. So it doesn't have a great sense of, hey, this one's going to be, 50-50 chance of getting this right, 50-50 chance of getting this wrong. But as you get along in the exam, the engine understands you better and has a better sense of your skill and is going to be presenting kind of more appropriate questions. But there's a weird implication here. And this is particularly the case, I think, for folks that are used to being extremely successful students, extremely successful test takers. You know who you are, right? You're the super preppers. You've already read like 12 different CISSP study guides. You've taken, tens of thousands of questions for practice. You're the super prepper, and you study hard and you go in and you ace everything because you just have that much, you're that attentive, right? Well, imagine a scenario where you've done all of this preparation, all of this study, and you're walking into an exam confident. You feel good, you've put in the hours of preparation, you feel like you're going to be extremely successful. Now imagine how this is going to feel to you when every question you see, you have a 50-50 chance of getting right. Now, I don't know how your grading scale worked when you were kind of in school, but getting a 50 on an exam, that was not a good thing, right? That's not good at all. And so the reason I mention this and emphasize this is that successful students, folks that are going to just kill the exam and just do really, really well on it, you're going to feel like it's harder than it should be. I've had a lot of folks reach out to me afterwards and they're like, oh my gosh, I felt totally underprepared, and oh, it was crazy how hard it was. I'm like, well, did you pass? Yeah, I passed, but gosh, I feel like, whoa, just was not prepared. I studied my brains out and I just wasn't prepared. And that's by design, right? It's by design that it's going to feel really, really difficult. And one of the most important things about that is to not let that rattle you. If you study adaptive testing, right, because who wants to do that? In the field of psychometry, because that's what this is called, people that are kind of focused on exams and assessments and how to come up with appropriate examinations that assess people effectively. Well, adaptive is not something that CISSP created, right? And some of you might have taken adaptive exams in the past, right? There are increasingly major exams that have moved to adaptive engines. But so there's a fair amount of research on adaptive exam engines and test taking strategies. And one of the things that is commonly referenced is that the earliest questions are the most important questions. So the adaptive engine, it's trying to decide, it's slapping the sorting hat on your head, and it's trying to do a binary sort and trying to decide pass, fail, pass, fail, pass, fail, right? With each question, it's trying to do this. And if you start off with a really bad streak, that has very significant implications. So most of the adaptive testing engine kind of guides and research, and this is a research paper. She's a PhD in psychology, psychometry, and she talks about the paper is test taking strategies in computer adaptive testing that will improve your score. And one of the call outs was spending more time and attention on the first 5 or 10 items will improve the examinee's final ability estimate. So this makes a big difference. Now, I mention this in particular because me as a test taker, I've taken tons of certifications over the years, I've taken tons of tests over the years, and I imagine that some of you are like me, where it takes you a little bit to kind of find your groove, to hit your stride, to warm up. So, me, I am not my absolute A1 best with the very first question. It probably takes me some minutes to kind of calm down, to be less anxious about things, to just really be ready and at my tip-top best to answer questions. If it takes you 5 minutes, 10 minutes to hit your groove, to feel like you're testing at your very best, you might have done yourself irreparable harm with respect to the exam. That's harsh. That's super harsh, but I want you to go in eyes wide open to the exam and understand how important those early questions are. And also, I'll mention this again later. Also, if you couple this, the earlier questions being the most important, if you couple that with the lack of issue with time management, then I think there's an opportunity here for at least some of you. If you know that you're a person that kind of in particular struggles with test anxiety and you have issues with this, or if you know that it takes you a while to kind of get warmed up and to feel like you're test taking at your very best, then you want to try to whatever extent you can, you want to try to get those nerves out before you answer the first question. whether that's taking a moment, whether that's just kind of sitting there and staring at the screen for 5 minutes or closing your eyes, because those early questions are so incredibly important. Now, that paper was not about the CISSP-CAT, the CISSP computer adaptive testing. It was about computer adaptive testing in general. There are some kind of tweaks and some nuances to the CISSP that kind of change this. So we mentioned that confidence interval rule, right? That's the main way that people pass-fail, is that confidence interval rule. The exam engine can figure you out and it decides, oh, yeah, I know, you have passed, you have failed. It's figured it out. If it can't, then there are two other rules that come into play. One is the maximum length rule, and one is the run out of time rule, that ROOT. Maximum length rule is, hey, if you get to 150 questions and we haven't decided whether you're a pass-fail with a confidence level of 95%, then it looks at the last 75 operational items answered. Wait. There's 150 questions that you just went through, and it looks at the last 75. Huh. Well, that kind of changes things. You know, in some respects, that mitigates those early questions, the importance of those early questions, maybe, but it doesn't, because those early questions could typically mean that you're going to end up with that confidence interval rule. So most students do not get to 150 questions. Likewise, most students, this last one in particular, run out of time. It's the, hey, you didn't get to 150 questions, but you hit 3 hours, which is the maximum time for that exam. And it's going to look at the last 75 operational items answered. So I would submit absolute, be at your tip-top best for those very first questions. But if you get into the exam and you feel, even still, you feel like, oh gosh, you know, some of those early ones, I could do better now. Try not to stress and think, well, you know, if I did poorly on some of those questions, then it might not destroy me, right? We might hit the maximum length rule or the maximum time rule. Now there was an adjective there on those last 75 questions. It said last 75 operational questions. Huh? What the heck are operational questions? Well, there are questions that you're going to see that don't count. They don't matter at all. Like the adaptive engine doesn't take them into account. You answered a question and it just ignores it. It already knew what it was going to, you know, present you with, but there are going to be these not ungraded, but there are going to be research questions that don't have any bearing on your particular exam. This is, hey, they're testing out new questions that are going to be developed in the future, that sort of thing. Okay, so how many of those are there? There are 25. 25. So if you only saw 100 questions, a full fourth of the exam doesn't count? Wow. I mean, that's kind of cool. So just who cares about those? But of course, they don't actually say, hey, this is a research question that doesn't count for anything, so you can just safely ignore me and skip me. And they don't tell you that. You're not going to know for sure whether something is a research question or not. But if that's the case, then why bring them up at all? How is that going to help you from a test-taking tactic, test-taking strategy perspective? Well, here's just kind of my first kind of hack. If you encounter a question and it makes you just absolutely angry, you are so frustrated, it's a terrible question, it doesn't make sense, it's just, there's not a right answer, it's a horrible, horrible question. Then, in your mind, what you're gonna do is you're gonna flip a switch. You're gonna flip a switch and say, oh, wait. You know what that is? That's a research question. So any question, it just makes you angry. You feel dumb just for reading the question, anything. Because the worst thing that could happen is that this question, even if it were graded, even if it wasn't a research question, the worst thing is that this question could have a knock-on effect for later questions. If you get really flustered by a question, are you going to perform at your best for the next questions? I know me, like personally, I can't let some things go. And I hit a question and it just makes me angry. I might still, maybe not really consciously, but it's still kind of stuck in the back of my head, like many questions later. Like when people walk out of the exam, oftentimes they don't remember every question, but they remember some questions. And it's usually questions that you didn't feel real confident in that stand out in your mind. Those ones that you had an emotional response to. So if a question conjures up a really emotional response to you, for here, it's me getting angry and cursing at the computer, like that's gonna help at all. Or it could be a different response. Well, flip that switch and say, oh, wait, this is a research question. It doesn't matter. I'm still gonna answer it to the best of my ability, because that's what we do, but it's a research question. Now, just one kind of additional pro tip on this is please, please, please do not keep a tally of the things that you think are research questions. Because on your little dry erase board, you look down and you're like, apparently my exam had 112 research questions. No, it didn't, right? So do not keep an accounting of the research questions. There might be many more than 25 that make you angry, and only 25 of them are going to be research questions. But just the main point is to not get flustered. And to me, that brings to mind something that's kind of a larger aspect. It's larger than just research questions. I want you to think about what would be your best self for taking a test. Like, when would you perform your absolute best? Or conversely, are there things that could be going on that could make you perform much worse? So, all right, if you're asleep, you're probably not going to do very well on the exam, but also if you didn't get enough rest, right? So rest, obviously, that's going to be important. It's important for every test, but it's certainly important for this one. You want to be at your best. You're sad. Now, sad can be, you can't control life, but this is another aspect of emotional response to questions. Some folks don't get angry about questions. They get really upset and they feel bad and they're just like demoralized. And that's going to have a big impact on you as well. Oh my gosh, just what is going on here? The shock, this is not what I expected. Those students that come to me afterwards are like, I felt utterly unprepared. Yeah, this is them. They're freaking out because they prepped and prepped and prepped and prepped and prepped. But then they got to the exam and it was like somebody just ripped the rug out from under them. They felt very much out of sorts. Well, are they going to be operating at their best? Are they going to be answering questions the best that they possibly could? I wonder, and I don't think so. Yep, the angry Seth. Yeah, angry Seth is not going to be the best performing Seth. I'm not going to make the best decisions. My brain isn't going to work as well if I'm angry. And maybe even slightly less angry than cursing at the computer. Another aspect, and this is kind of related to the crying Seth, is the facepalm. I have a number of folks that they come out demoralized, where you just feel bad about yourself because, like me, when I took this test, it was a pass or fired sort of situation. I took the CISSP and the CISSP was required for the job that I was recently hired into. I didn't have the CISSP. I was like a CISSP conscientious objector, And I had never taken the CISSP. I was told, pass or you're fired effectively. And I get to the exam expecting like, oh, I'm a security professional. I got years of experience. I know this. And I felt very, very quickly like, oh gosh, what have I done? I did not study enough. I did not prep enough. And so now hanging over my head is, oh, my life is over. My career is over. This is just, and that is certainly not going to be the best version of yourself. So what is your best test taking self? Calm, equanimous, right? This is in my mind, this is Serenity Firefly. This is Wash. I am a leaf on the wind. Watch how we soar, right? Just, you're going to take anything that comes your way, and it's not going to freak you out. It's not going to cause an emotional response of really any sort. You're calm, you're even keeled, you've got this. And we want this from question one. And that's tough. That's absolutely tough. So we know this. We understand that there are some versions of ourself that are going to perform better than others. And it has nothing necessarily to do with your knowledge, because your knowledge doesn't change from day to day, right? Your intellect doesn't change from day to day, but what does change from day to day and hour to hour and second to second is your mood, is how you feel, your emotions, and that has a really significant impact, or it can have a really significant impact on your performance. I think the most common, or at least commonly talked about aspect of this is test anxiety. My brother and my cousin are both physicians, and they're like 1 year apart, right? The same age, basically. They're both physicians. My brother is an emergency medicine physician, and my cousin is a psychiatrist. And my cousin is the super prepper. He's the one that would put in tens of thousands of hours and spend years and have this crazy study plan that just, he would prep, because he had a goal and he was very much goal oriented, and he would come up with a plan and he would stick to the plan. My brother is fly by the seat of his pants, sort of, we'll figure it out. And that kind of fits with him being emergency medicine, I suppose. But my cousin, the super prepper that was like valedictorian of his university, he struggled mightily with test anxiety. And it had nothing whatsoever to do with his being smart, his having studied, his having prepared. He just suffered from test anxiety. And this is something that can have a really, really negative impact on your exam. And I think the impact is even more pronounced with the adaptive, because of those issues with the early questions being more important or the most important. That has really significant implications. So how do we decrease our stress level? How do we reduce our test anxiety? I'd say one is to know what to expect. Know what to expect going in. And I give one example of this on the slide on the left. There's a Pearson VUE demo test engine. Now, it's not built for the CISSP, so there's going to be like skip questions and stuff like that that are not going to be applicable. But you can go through and see, well, what are the different question types going to look like? What's it going to feel like? Get familiar with the interface. Likewise, I talk about with students, in particular students that have issues with test anxiety, I talk about, well, you want to know, to the extent possible, everything that you're going to encounter. And I'm not talking about encounter on the exam question-wise. I'm talking about just being familiar with the setting, being familiar with the test site, being familiar with your commute or travel to the test site that's going to occur. Just as much possible, to the extent possible, trying to control your environment can have a significant impact on your anxiety. To try to reduce the unexpected, try to understand what to expect. But of course, in the exam, you're not going to be able to expect the particular questions. You're not going to know the subject matter of the particular question. So we have to also be able to prepare for the unexpected to the extent possible. There are things that are outside of our control. Certainly the test questions we receive are outside of our control, but there's other things in life that are outside of our control. So in particular, with the emphasis on early questions and the importance, the kind of outsized importance of those early questions for most test takers, you got to be at your best on question 1. Now, this might not work for you. This might not be the way that you do it, but I put over here some different, on the right, I put over here some different meditation apps, right? So you got the more adult-oriented ones like Calm and Headspace and Insight Timer. And then there's one, hey, this might work for you well. There's the, what is it? Stop, Breathe, Do, or Do, Breathe, Stop, or Breathe, Stop, Do, something like that. It's from Sesame Street, and it's basically a meditation app. Really, it's a conflict and meditation app for kids that helps them understand how to solve problems. But it resonates. If you just have this, like, if you just feel it just crawls all over you, the idea of, oh, I'm not someone who meditates, right? I'm from Mississippi, and I know a lot of folks that are just like, what? No, that ain't me. Well, if that's the case, then maybe the Sesame Street one will be more palatable to you, right? So just a heads up. This might be something as simple, not being a yogi, not turning like super hardcore into meditation, but just some basic breathing practices, calming practices. And you want to be able to do this at the beginning, at the outset of the exam. Like, seriously, because time management doesn't matter nearly as much as it used to, because you submit that question and it's gone forever. You can't debate over it endlessly, which is where people just kind of got stuck. So I seriously suggest folks that suffer from anxiety, test anxiety, or just kind of heightened emotions in general, take as long as you need on the front end, whether it's 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes. 5 minutes is not going to be the difference in your success or failure. So take 5 minutes before you even answer the very first question to calm yourself, to try to get to that best version of yourself that's going to be a successful test taker. So our last kind of chunk is going to be on, last chunk of this presentation is going to be on the types of questions you're going to encounter. So you get 100 to 150, that 25 of them are unscored. The overwhelming majority are just going to be straight up multiple choice with 4 answer choices. So you got a multiple choice question, you got 4 possible answers. Big important part with your straight up standard multiple choice is that you are asked to select the best answer. You are required to submit an answer for any question. You can't leave anything blank. Getting stuff wrong doesn't count against you. It just changes what the engine is going to. You got to answer every question. You can't skip questions, and that's not really even possible with the adaptive engine. Most of our questions are multiple choice, Most of our questions are multiple choice or some variation upon the theme of multiple choice, where it doesn't present like a standard multiple choice, but it actually is. The most important aspect of approaching these multiple choice questions is to realize that you need to provide the best answer. Now, best does not mean just the correct answer, because you could and you might well encounter a question that you think has 2 or even 3 correct answers, and you have to select the best one. So you could also, on the other side of things, you will encounter this. You'll encounter a question and you'll see 4 answer choices. You'll say, nope, right answer ain't here. There's not a correct answer here. These are all bad answers, or it's just a bad question in general, and it makes no sense. And regardless, you are still to select the best. Best being the least bad, or best being the most good. You select the best. Key to that is making sure that you actually read every question. You're going to end up with, as you read a question, in your brain, you're going to conjure up what you think is the correct answer. You're going to have this, you're going to formulate it in your mind for many questions. You're going to be kind of processing it while you read the question. You come up with the answer before you've ever looked at the answer choices. That's great. That's wonderful. The trap that you can fall into is what happens when that A, that first answer choice that you encounter, is what you came up with in your head. Huh. Oh, well, look, there's my answer. Done. You might well be correct. That might be the best answer, but you have to read every other answer choice. You can fall into the trap of kind of confirmation or expectation bias, where you were looking for something, you were thinking that it was going to be there, and oh, look, there it is, and then you pounce. That's a trap. Just be careful, read every answer choice. Scenario-based questions freak people out. This is the, hey, you're gonna get a passage, you're gonna get some scenario, it's gonna be like multiple paragraphs long, and then you're gonna get one or multiple questions related to that scenario. The most important thing to do with scenario-based questions is to realize that the CISSP is not a reading comprehension exam. It's not. You're not being tested for reading comprehension. The main trick that they're going to throw at you with the scenario-based questions is they're going to give you a whole bunch of superfluous, unnecessary information, stuff you don't need to know. Now, imagine this. You're reading this passage, you're reading this scenario, it's presenting this, oftentimes they're presenting like a company, and there's different aspects of the company, and they're presenting all this information. Well, what your brain is naturally doing is you're trying to analyze the information, trying to distill that information while you read the passage. So you're thinking, okay, well, if this is the case that it said here, then this means this and this, and you're trying to really understand what's going on in this scenario. Okay, that makes sense, I suppose, but it's, in my experience and my recommendation, it is not the best way to approach these. The best way to approach these, in my opinion, is before you even open up that passage. It's going to be a separate button where you have to pop it open. Before you even approach that passage, you read the question, you read all the answer choices. You can encounter scenario-based questions where the scenario doesn't matter at all, where you look at the question like, oh, well, the answer is clearly this regardless of the scenario. Now, open up the scenario anyway, but once you have looked at the question and answer, now, instead of trying to comprehend the entirety of this scenario that's presented to you, now you're reading it, you're attacking this passage with a purpose. You're attacking it looking for basically a binary sort, relevant, not relevant, pertinent, not pertinent. Does this relate to my question? Does this not relate? So you can read faster, and you can read faster, and you can parse this and analyze this faster. This has been a huge, huge boon for a lot of my students over the years. And so I would highly recommend that you at least test this out on practice exams. Approach the question and answers first before you even look at the passage. You can have hotspot questions. This is another style of question. A hotspot question is one where you are provided some image, some diagram, some, oftentimes they're going to be network diagrams, but they're going to be other things. Now, really, a hotspot is just a variant of multiple choice. It's a variant of multiple choice, and the reason I say this, you can effectively click anywhere, but there's not an infinite number of meaningful places to click. So regardless of the question, right? Just the question entirely aside. Like, there are only so many reasonable places. If this were a hotspot, there's only so many reasonable places to click, right? You can click up here in the email, you can click this hash algorithm, probably not. You can click this digest, you can click, right? So there's, in this case, not even 4 answer choices, I think. But you can have, if it's a network diagram, it's effectively multiple choice, but with additional distractors potentially. Our last style of question is the one that's a little different. All the previous ones are really just multiple choice or variants on multiple choice. Drag and drop is the last style. And this is, hey, you need to select really multiple answer choices. You're going to take things from one column, you're going to move it over to another column, maybe putting them in order, things like that. So one suggestion is, look, if they present you with a drag and drop and you drag one thing over, you're probably wrong. Because why would they give you a drag and drop question if only one thing was going to be in the answer? But the whole purpose of drag and drop is that you can select multiple answers. So look for multiple answers. This is kind of that multiple choice, but with multiple correct answers. Your standard multiple choice, every other multiple choice, it's not going to say A and B, but not C. None of that. It's not going to say all of the above. Whereas drag and drop, you'll have multiple things that are going to constitute the best answer. So as an example, this is our drag and drop, possible answer choices on the left. You slide those over to the correct answer spot on the right. If you find yourself only grabbing one, you're probably wrong. Right? These are built for multiple answer choices. So just a heads up there. The final kind of parting shot is you need to think like the CISSP. And there's different ways of parsing that. One is you just have to accept that the ISC squared way, the common body of knowledge way of thinking, is the way of thinking on the exam. That doesn't really help, right? That doesn't really help with approaching questions. But to me, the aspect that can help on the test is to realize and know in your bones that the CISSP is really, whether it says it or not, whether it's explicit or not, the CISSP is really a security manager's exam. We use it in ways far, far removed from that. But even if you look at ISC squared themselves, ISC squared says jobs that typically use or require the CISSP. Look at all the ones I highlighted in yellow. All of those are management. Now, yes, there are other roles there, but that's a heck of a lot of management and variations upon the theme of management. Oh, CIO or CISO, or there's a lot of management in there. And the way that you approach the questions should reflect that. This is, hey, all the links, all the references that were included in the presentation, they're here. So this is just when you do download that slide deck later on, when you look at the webcast, these are shorty links for all of the different references and resources. So that's what I got. I hope this is helpful. I think the main thing is to realize that, yes, subject matter matters, right? The content matters, but just knowing the material is not sufficient typically for folks to be successful on the exam. It's realizing that there's more to it than that. And if you just jump at it without understanding some of these aspects that we've covered, then I think you have not set yourself up for success. So I hope this was helpful, and I'm going to look now at questions and see if we have a little bit of time left for questions. All right. Are the first 25 questions unscored? Someone asked. It's not the first 25, it's 25 of the first 100 questions. So it's not the first 25. That would be awesome if it were the first 25. That would be tremendous. That would make life a lot easier. So it's not the first 25. It's just some of them. Let me see. All right. What is the time taken to answer any? Does the time taken to answer the question impact the score? It has never been suggested by ISC squared that is the case. So I'm going to say no. And you know, folks that have adopted the, hey, I'm going to wait 5 minutes before doing something, you know, I've not had those folks be unsuccessful as a result of that. So I'd say no, the amount of time it takes you is not something that's fed into the adaptive engine. The best practice test bank for the CISSP, in truth, I would say approach all practice test questions with an eye to not using that as a means to learn the subject matter and learn the material, because honestly, there's a lot of really poor practice questions out there. I would use them more than anything as just kind of getting you exposure to test questions, just getting you exposure to taking questions and having to jump into them. So I'd use the practice tests. They can be useful, but I would not put too much weight in what questions they provide, because they're not going to be the actual questions, and don't get too hung up on the actual content in those questions. Think of them more as kind of getting you into fighting shape for the exam. So one question is kind of commenting that one of those last comments that I had was, hey, one of the last comments I have was, you got to think like the CISSP, and that is an aspect. So there are questions, there's a question related to what's the best way to read and understand what ISC squared is asking. I think some of that is understanding, well, the way that they approach the common body of knowledge. I mean, there is the common body of knowledge book, but it reads like stereo instructions, so don't go there. But I would say that when studying the content, you need to be looking at the content from the vantage point of not real world. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but you don't want to get overly focused on real world, because you need to be in the CISSP world. So it should, in particular, map back to their language. And the CISSP provides a lot of books that they use as their kind of reference touchstones. And you can go and read all of those books, but I would say that a good study guide should help kind of narrow things down for you. All right. Oh, good. I'm glad this is helpful. What time of day seems to be the best or more common time to take the exam? This is absolutely depends on your personality. If you just try to think in terms of your daily cycle and when are you at your best, right? When do you feel most confident, most comfortable? When are you most alert? A lot of folks, it's early in the morning, but not everybody. Some folks, they seem to come alive in the evening time. And if that's you, then setting it up first thing in the morning might be a disaster for you. So let's see. Oh, this is a good question that I didn't cover. So the CISSP gets updated. They update their exam outline, used to be called the Candidate Information Bulletin. They update that every 3 years, más o menos, and we are due for an update. The update cycle, if they follow the typical update cycle, a new version of the exam will launch next year, so 2021. And usually it's around April-ish, March, April timeframe when the exam kind of flips. So if this is, we don't yet know, they have not released the details of the exam outline. They usually do it like in the fall prior, but last time they did it like a month before the exam switched, which was kind of painful. So if you have been studying hard and the content that you've been studying is not related to the new one, because nobody knows what is going to be on the new one in particular or what the changes are, then I would really try to attend to taking the exam certainly prior to April, because that's usually when it launches, but give yourself a little cushion in case they move the date forward or something like that. Let's see. Slides will be downloaded. How do we download them? They're going to be posted on SANS. So if you you just search for the title of this webinar, CISSP Test Taking Tactics, on SANS website, you'll be able to find them. All right. Running out of time. Question on what percentage of people pass the CISSP? Nobody knows. ISC Squared doesn't release that information. 25 years in hands-on technical roles, how do you suggest adopting or adapting that manager mindset? Try to put yourself in the shoes of people that have been above you or managing you in some respects, and look at it. Try to step back from the technical weeds. There can be some traps where they throw you something that sounds like technically the best answer, but the better answer is one which is more general and more attuned to risk and cost impact. Let's see. We've got somebody asked, drag and drop question, is partial credit a thing? They have not said so. They've not said exactly how they do that, to my knowledge, but my expectation is that it's right or wrong. So you either get it exactly right and that's the best answer, or you get it wrong. That's my expectation. Let's see. Yeah, the wording can be really challenging on ISC squared questions. I would say, hopefully, I've heard some suggestions that newer questions are getting better, but one of the ways they have their gargantuan test bank is by not retiring questions, at least as aggressively as I would think. Let's see. All right.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.